In March of 2025, the Angus Reid Institute conducted a poll where they asked Canadians which of the following candidates they would prefer to deal with Donald Trump in the context of the newly developing trade war. Now, Mark Carney won by 43%, followed closely by Chrystia Freeland for some reason with 36%, and trailing behind her was Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Now, given the coverage from the legacy media at the time, it's really not hard to see why things ended up the way that they did. But hindsight is always 20/20, guys, because as you know, this is where we are today. Every single country that received that letter from Donald Trump has now managed to strike a deal and reach lower tariffs, all except for Canada, which begs the question, does Mark Carney really even want a deal? Let's get right into it. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Johnny Says So. Mark Carney's self-imposed deadline of August 1st has come and gone, and there is no resolution in sight to the trade war or the tariff situation with the United States. Far from it. In fact, we are paying higher tariffs now than we were when this madness started, and Donald Trump is actively ignoring Mark Carney. And the Liberal Party and the legacy media are in full damage control and gaslighting and spinning this situation to try to make themselves look better. And I honestly can't blame them, guys, because this is the situation we are in. How embarrassing. England down to 10% tariffs after negotiating with Donald Trump. The European Union at 15%. Japan at 15%. And we are now up 10% at 35% tariffs. Now, that poll that I showed you in the beginning, that is a very accurate reflection of the motivations of a lot of Canadians when they went to the polls to secure Mark Carney a minority government. And boy, did he ever run with this narrative. Mark Carney said repeatedly that we are in the worst crisis of our lifetimes, and the legacy media was right behind him every step of the way. For months, the news was full of doom and gloom about the damage and economic destruction that these tariffs would have on Canada's economy. And I just find it really interesting that as soon as Mark Carney failed so spectacularly in his one big promise to Canadians, we start seeing stuff like this overnight, guys. Look at this. They can't even bother to change the headline. CTV News, Canada's economy is showing resilience against U.S. tariffs. Why? Toronto Sun, Canada's economy is showing resilience against U.S. tariffs. So I don't want to be redundant, but you can see here that CP24, Toronto Star, CBC, and even the National Post, who's usually pretty based, is running with this same narrative. Now, although Mark Carney is clearly in no hurry to make a deal with Donald Trump, this CTV News clip sheds some light on Trump's motivations for maybe not wanting to speak with Mark Carney either. Let's take a look.
Leaving Washington without a new agreement last week. Dominic LeBlanc making that statement today on a U.S. talk show. President Trump has said the increased tariffs are due to the flow of fentanyl, but as CTV's Colton Prale reports, a top American trade official is offering a different reason.
Donald Trump says fentanyl trafficking is the reason goods leaving this port for the United States now face a 35% tariff. But according to his trade ambassador, that's not the only reason.
Canada retaliated. The only other country in the world who retaliated on tariffs was the Chinese.
Canada's counter tariffs were...
Now imagine that, guys. Imagine every single other country having the common sense to do what is right for their economy and negotiate with the United States for something of a better deal. But not Canada, guys, because we are just too proud. For some reason, we have it in our heads that we can win a trade war with the United States, the world's largest economy. It's completely mind-blowing, to be honest. And it's just really interesting to me that we are so closely tied with China on this one issue. It's not good to have things like this in common with China, guys. And it's no surprise that this happened under Justin Trudeau, who, in his own words, admires China's basic dictatorship and how they can turn their economy around on a dime. So now we have Justin Trudeau's economic advisor calling the shots. How did we get here, guys? This is really lame.
Were announced under Justin Trudeau and target $60 billion of American goods, including steel and aluminum. Mark Carney hasn't increased them, but he also isn't dropping them.
The national security interest of Canada requires that we have a viable steel and aluminum sector.
Trump has threatened to increase tariffs if Canada retaliates again. Carney said he was ready to bring in more counter tariffs August 1st if there was no deal, but didn't do so.
There's the political
Elbows down again, guys.
elbows up view on this, and then there's the practical view, and these tariffs are effectively taxes being paid by Canadians.
Today, the Prime Minister reiterating counter tariffs aren't his focus.
Building in a Canadian way, building sustainably, building together, building positively, and that's what we're going to do. And yes, we'll come to something with the Americans, something constructive with the Americans.
So there's Mark Carney at Vancouver Pride in the worst crisis of our lifetimes, just completely dismissing the situation that he spent months whipping everybody into a panic over. I'm not buying it, guys, not one bit.
With multiple deadlines to get a deal done now come and gone, some are questioning just how far off an agreement really is.
I would describe it as no man's land in terms of figuring out how we get these negotiations to some sort of a mutually beneficial conclusion.
A recent report from the Royal Bank of Canada says Trump's increased 35% tariffs are not expected to significantly alter Canada's economic outlook. Dominic LeBlanc also says the Prime Minister and President will likely speak over the next number of days. Trump claims Carney called him on Thursday, but the two never spoke.
As if that's not bad enough, while Mark Carney is living it up in Vancouver, partying at the Pride Parade, talking a big game about building Canada strong, one economy, being our own best customer, all those nonsense slogans that he likes to spout, the Liberal Party is repeatedly getting called out for handing over contracts for Canadian infrastructure to American and Chinese companies. Check this out, guys. This is Conservative MP Dan Alabas calling Chrystia Freeland out for BC's handing over of construction of ferries to the Chinese. Check this one out.
Minister, the ink isn't even dry on President Trump's latest executive order, basically targeting Canada for 35%. Our steel and aluminum workers, they are scared. And yet here we have an opportunity to be able to fund here in Canada, the elbows up, Canada strong rhetoric that your government has been putting out. We can stop this loan by the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and we can go to the table with BC Ferries and plan to do it and support our steel and aluminum workers here and shipbuilders here in this country. Are you standing by the loan?
Thank you, Mr. Albus, for your question. And I do want to start by saying I know that the wildfires are touching your constituency, and I want to say I support you and your constituents, and the federal government is here to provide any support they need. I totally agree with you that this is a moment of crisis for the Canadian steel and aluminum sectors, and they need our government's support. They need our country's support. I was on the phone this morning with the CEO of one of our steel companies and was in touch with one of our union leaders, as well as talking to the CEO of C-SPAN.
So why aren't they using Canadian steel? Why are we importing cheap Chinese steel from a country that is also slapping us with tariffs? Doesn't seem very elbows up to me, Chrystia.
My approach right now is to ensure that in the areas under my control, the areas that Transport Canada has responsibility for, we are pushing for Canadian workers in the manufacturing sector and for the use of Canadian steel and aluminum. That's why I sent out 71 letters in June to all the agencies I'm responsible for. That's why I'm convening a meeting specifically ensuring that we are building ferries in Canada using Canadian steel, and why we'll be convening a meeting to do the same thing with the rail sector.
So this is what they always do, guys. Despite Mark Carney's constant rhetoric about one Canadian economy instead of 13, this is how it works here. The federal and the provincial governments all kick the can down the road and blame each other for their shortcomings every single opportunity that they get. So quite clearly, the federal government is not at all serious about protecting Canadian jobs in the steel sector. And the madness and hypocrisy does not end there, guys. This one's out of Ontario. industry group urges Ford to cancel a $140 million contract awarded to a U.S. firm. That's right, guys. Questions are being raised about a major construction contract tied to Ontario's largest hospital project after a U.S.-owned company was awarded a $140 million contract. Now, this is especially egregious because it's in Doug Ford's backyard. Now, of all the premiers, he's the one who's been most loud and obnoxious about the elbows up rhetoric. This guy even threatened to cut off electricity to some U.S. states at the height of the madness during the election. So back to Mark Carney. All of this is completely contradictory to his statement that he put out following Donald Trump's executive order of 35% tariffs. He ends it by saying Canadians will be our own best customer, creating more well-paying careers at home as we strengthen and diversify our trading partnerships throughout the world. We can give ourselves more than any foreign government can ever take away by building with Canadian workers and by using Canadian resources to benefit all Canadians. Now, based on what you've seen so far, do you think that this at all rings true? Let me know what you think down in the comments. So the contradictions and hypocrisy from Justin Trudeau's recycled, re-elected inner circle don't just end with Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland, unfortunately. So here's Melanie Jolie explaining how Canada is leading the charge in dealing with Donald Trump and fighting back with counter tariffs. And it later turned out that no, Canada and China were the only ones foolish enough to do so. Listen to this.
Based on that, we've led the charge because we didn't launch this trade war, and we know that there are no winners in a trade war.
Yay, we've led the charge. How did that work out for us exactly?
But we came up with $60 billion worth of counter tariffs on American goods in Canada. And also the Prime Minister Carney, just announced that we will also retaliate 25% tariffs against auto and auto parts that are not covered by the trade deal we have with the U.S. So basically American cars and American parts coming to Canada but are not compliant.
What is the reaction from the White House to that? Because Donald Trump said on so-called Liberation Day that any country that tries to retaliate, that he will increase further the tariffs.
We're defending ourselves. We never started this trade war. And it is clear to us, knowing so well the American people, that the American people don't agree with the actions coming out of the White House. And, Shauna, the only way for President Trump to back off on his trade war is for American people themselves to say it's enough. And they are the ones that can create the political pressure within their own system to make sure that that's the case. And that's exactly why we launched an advertising campaign in 12 Republican states, red states, which clearly states what tariffs are.
Okay, so she's talking about launching an advertising campaign, politically motivated, in another country. Could that be another reason why Donald Trump and the Americans are not happy with us at this moment in time? Just imagine if Russia, China, or India advertised in Canada or co-opted our political system in such a way. Imagine the outrage. Or maybe it's already happened here. Who knows? Let me know what you think down in the comments.
Which it is, tariffs are clearly a tax on hardworking Americans. Tariffs are...
Yes, and counter tariffs are a tax on hardworking Canadians.
Are also a tax at the gas pump. Tariffs are also a tax on their grocery bill. So we've made it clear to the American public, and we're seeing that there is a lot of frustration within American society towards what's happening now. Now, I think we have to retaliate. We need to defend ourselves. And so not only are we leading the charge, we're the country at this point that has imposed counter tariffs the most against U.S. goods. We're working with the EU. I had just a conversation with the EU Trade Commissioner, Sefcovic. We're working also with Asian partners, and we'll continue to put maximum pressure.
So as much as Carney likes to say that Canada is the most European of the non-European countries, maybe we don't have so much in common with them after all, because they were smart enough to look out for their best interests and try to negotiate a deal with the U.S. Now, the legacy media and the Liberal government, as of late, has been trying to paint it as no big deal that these tariffs are coming into effect, because they point out that over 90% of our exports are covered by the USMCA. But don't forget, guys, that is going to be expired next year. So again, they're just kicking the can further down the road. And I think this is going to spell disaster for Canada. But let me know what you think down in the comments. And as always, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Johnny from Nova Scotia says thank you. Hey, Johnny from Nouvelle-Écosse, il dit merci, thank you.
Thanks to you.
Thank you so much. Perfect. Yeah, Quebec.